The Xr'tikian High Command war room buzzed with an energy that could only be described as smugly anticipatory. Admiral Xr'tikian's translucent appendages quivered with barely contained excitement as he addressed the gathered council members, their bioluminescent forms casting an eerie green glow across the crystalline chamber. "Fellow council members," he gurgled through his respiratory filters, "for too long we have watched these humans." He spat the word like it was a particularly nasty form of space algae. "These bipedal menaces have expanded across 17 solar systems in mere decades. Their infectious form of trade agreements and what they call cultural exchange programs threatens the very fabric of our galactic order." A chorus of agreeing bubbles rose from the assembled aliens. High Scientist Xr'tikan bobbed nervously in her suspension tank. "But Admiral, our previous attempts to contain them have all failed spectacularly. Need I remind everyone of the Martian debacle?" The chamber fell silent. Nobody wanted to remember how humanity had turned their perfectly orchestrated invasion into an entertainment broadcast they called reality TV. This time, Admiral Xr'tikan's voice took on a tone that in human terms would be described as absolutely insufferable. "We have something different, something elegant." He gestured with 3 of his 12 appendages, and a holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber. "Behold, Operation Grape Expectations." The silence that followed was broken only by Chief Strategist Clopip's barely suppressed snort, which he quickly disguised as a filter malfunction. "They have this beverage," Xr'tikan continued, choosing to ignore the interruption, "called wine. Our analysis shows that 38.2% of their diplomatic functions, business deals, and social gatherings involve this particular fermented fruit juice. We have developed a compound that, when introduced to their wine supply, will render them," he paused for dramatic effect, "completely unable to engage in complex negotiations." The council members wiggled their sensory tentacles in what passed for appreciative applause among their species. None of them noticed High Scientist Xr'tikan's quiet muttering about humans' peculiar resistance to what should have been lethal substances in previous experiments. "The compound is already being distributed," Xr'tikan announced triumphantly. "Soon, very soon, the humans will learn their place in the galactic order. And the best part?" His bioluminescence pulsed with pride. "They won't even know what hit them until it's too late." The war room erupted in celebratory phosphorescence, their bodies glowing like a disco ball made of jellyfish. In their excitement, not one of them thought to question why a species capable of surviving in space would be brought low by spiked grape juice. The Xr'tikian archives held many embarrassing moments in their species' history, but none quite matched their continued failure to subjugate humanity. The records, kept in crystalline memory banks that pulsed with a soft azure glow, documented what the High Command had dubbed the 3 great disappointments. The first attempt, dubbed Operation Needle in a Haystack, named after studying human idioms, which they clearly didn't quite understand, involved releasing millions of microscopic combat drones into Earth's atmosphere. The plan was simple: the drones would infiltrate human technology and shut down their primitive power grids. Unfortunately, nobody had accounted for Earth's teenagers with their unprecedented ability to break technology in ways that defied the laws of physics. Within weeks, human adolescents had not only discovered the drones, but had turned them into a viral social media trend called Glitter Bombs 2.0. The second invasion, Operation Underground, they'd given up on human idioms by this point, targeted Earth's subway systems. The Xr'tikians had spent years studying these underground tunnels, convinced they'd found humanity's secret military transport network. Their elite forces emerged from the depths of New York's subway system at rush hour, only to be completely ignored by commuters, who assumed it was either a movie shoot or another weird marketing campaign. One alien warrior was even given a mixtape by an aspiring rapper, but it was the third attempt, the infamous Martian debacle, that really broke their spirit. The Xr'tikians had established a secret base on Mars, planning a dramatic reveal and show of force. They'd spent years building impressive structures and weapons arrays, carefully hiding them from Earth's primitive satellites. Or so they thought. When they finally emerged in what should have been a terrifying display of alien might, they found camera crews waiting. Apparently, some human with too much time on their hands had spotted their construction project on Google Mars and turned it into a reality TV pitch. The show Mars Makeover Extreme Edition ran for 3 seasons. High scientist Xr'tikians had compiled extensive notes on humanity's bizarre adaptability. Her research showed that humans had this irritating habit of turning potential extinction-level events into entertainment, educational opportunities, or worst of all, profitable business ventures. The Martian base was now a popular tourist destination, complete with a gift shop selling plush toys of confused-looking Xr'tikian warriors. The most frustrating part was humanity's tendency to learn from each attempt. Their technology kept advancing in unexpected leaps, often inspired by studying the remnants of failed invasion attempts. They'd even managed to reverse engineer the microscopic combat drones into something called nanite makeup that was apparently all the rage this season. As Admiral Xr'tikians reviewed these records for the 100th time, his bioluminescence dimmed with remembered embarrassment. The documentation ended with a particularly humiliating note. Humans had officially classified the Xr'tikians as mostly harmless in their galactic database, adding insult to injury by citing some Earth author named Adams. This time would be different, though. This time they were using humanity's own vices against them. No more dramatic invasions or complex plots, just a simple case of spiked wine. What could possibly go wrong? Somewhere in the archives, a data crystal containing Murphy's Law glowed ominously, its warning untranslated and unheeded. Operation Grape Expectations unfolded with all the subtlety of a supernova in a small galaxy. The Xr'tikians, masters of overthinking simple problems, had deployed their most sophisticated infiltration units to Earth's major wine-producing regions. These units, disguised as what they believed to be inconspicuous Earth creatures, were actually drawing more attention than they were avoiding. In Bordeaux, France, a mysterious 6-foot-tall peacock with slight bioluminescence had become something of a local celebrity. Tourists were actively trying to spot what social media had dubbed the glowing gastronome, as it had been repeatedly photographed waddling through vineyards at night, carefully dipping what appeared to be scientific instruments into wine vats. Meanwhile, in Napa Valley, California, a group of very tall penguins had successfully infiltrated a major winery by somehow getting themselves hired as tour guides. Their cover story of being method actors preparing for an avant-garde performance piece had been immediately accepted by the local artistic community. They were even getting rave reviews on Yelp for their committed performance and innovative interpretation of wine-tasting ceremonies. Chief Operations Officer Xr'tikians monitored these activities from orbit, tentacles wrapped around their face in what the humans would recognize as a facepalm. "How are they not noticing?" they muttered, watching as another infiltration unit, this one poorly disguised as a rather geometric cow, attempted to blend in with the vineyards of Tuscany. The compound itself was a masterpiece of Xr'tikian biochemistry, developed by a team led by high scientist Xr'tikians, who had attached numerous warnings and caveats to the project, all of which were ceremoniously ignored. It was designed to interact specifically with the ethanol in wine, creating a substance that would render humans temporarily incapable of their usual diplomatic craftiness. The compound is now present in approximately 97.3% of Earth's wine supply, reported technical analyst Mippop, their bioluminescence pulsing with pride. "Our agents have successfully introduced it to everything from the finest vintages to something called boxed wine, which we believe to be some form of emergency ration." In the war room, Admiral Xr'tikians was practically glowing with satisfaction. "Show me the distribution maps again," he commanded, watching as holographic displays illuminated the chamber with dots representing contaminated wineries. The lights clustered around major wine-producing regions formed patterns that, coincidentally, looked exactly like connect-the-dots pictures of Earth animals. Nobody mentioned that the pattern over France distinctly resembled a rubber duck. "And the humans suspect nothing?" asked one of the council members, still traumatized from the Martian debacle and expecting camera crews to pop out at any moment. "Nothing," Xr'tikians declared triumphantly. "Our operatives report that humans are continuing to consume wine at their usual rate. In fact, sales have increased in some regions due to our agents' enthusiastic participation in wine-tasting events." The room erupted in tentacle-wiggling celebration. Streams of bioluminescent party spores filled the air, a traditional Xr'tikian celebration that would have looked suspiciously like a rave to human observers. Even the usually pessimistic high scientist Xr'tikians had to admit that, so far, the plan seemed to be working. "The humans have scheduled a major diplomatic event next week," announced Chief Strategist Clopip, bringing up the details on the main display. "The annual Interstellar Cultural Exchange and Trade Summit. Every major species will be there, and the humans as hosts have promised to showcase their finest wines." "Perfect." Admiral Xr'tikians' voice carried that particular tone of someone who really should know better by now. "We'll all have front-row seats to watch humanity's carefully crafted diplomatic facade crumble. No more of their clever trade deals, no more of their cultural exchange programs, no more of their inexplicably successful negotiation techniques." As the celebration continued, nobody noticed the small alert blinking on one of the monitoring stations. It was reporting an unusual spike in human purchases of something called the good stuff for when the aliens finally show up. The computer had filed it under probably not important, a classification that would prove to be somewhat of an understatement. The annual Interstellar Cultural Exchange and Trade Summit was being held in Geneva, Switzerland, a location chosen specifically because humans found it amusingly ironic to host intergalactic peace talks in a country famous for its neutrality. The Grand Conference Hall had been decorated with a mixture of Earth and alien aesthetics, creating what the event planner described as retro-futuristic chic, and what most aliens assumed was some sort of visual warning system. Admiral Xr'tikians and his command staff had arrived early, positioning themselves strategically around the room in what they believed to be subtle observation posts. In reality, they looked like a group of anxious parents chaperoning their first teenage party, complete with poorly concealed surveillance equipment and nervous tentacle wringing. "Status report," Xr'tikians whispered into his communication device, trying to look casual while his bioluminescence betrayed his excitement with rapid pulses of green light. "All wine being served has been confirmed to contain our compound," reported technical analyst Mippop, who was poorly disguised as a potted plant in the corner. "The humans have even brought out their most prestigious vintages. They're calling it, let me check my notes, the good stuff." The gathering was in full swing. Representatives from across the galaxy mingled with human diplomats, scientists, and business leaders. The Xr'tikians, with their crystalline bodies, were creating impromptu light shows as they moved through the room. The Xr'tikians, being gaseous entities, had to stay in their containment suits, but had decorated them festively for the occasion. Even the notoriously reclusive Quantum Collective had sent a representative, though nobody was quite sure where they were or weren't at any given moment. The humans, playing perfect hosts, were ensuring everyone's glasses remained full. Admiral Xr'tikians watched with barely contained glee as human after human sipped their contaminated wine. He kept waiting for the effects to begin, the loss of coordination, the diplomatic fumbling, the breakdown of their careful political maneuvering. Nothing happened. Well, not nothing. The humans were actually becoming more animated, more talkative, more successful at negotiating. "How is this possible?" Xr'tikians hissed to High Scientist Xr'tikians, who had abandoned her disguise as a coat rack after several guests tried to hang their jackets on her. "They've consumed enough of the compound to render a Kraken comatose." "Perhaps we should review our initial assumptions," Xr'tikians suggested, her tentacles twisting in what might have been scientific concern or suppressed amusement. The humans seemed to be enjoying themselves. Indeed, the humans were in rare form. A trade representative had just negotiated an incredibly complex deal with the Xr'tikians while casually swirling a glass of red wine. A human scientist was explaining quantum mechanics to the Quantum Collective, who seemed impressed, though it was hard to tell given their probabilistic nature, while finishing their third glass of champagne. And in the corner, a human diplomat was teaching a group of Xr'tikians what appeared to be drinking songs. "Our sensors indicate the compound is definitely present in their bloodstreams," reported Chief Medical Officer Plixnor, staring at his readings in disbelief. "But their cognitive functions aren't declining. If anything, they're improving." The situation reached its peak when the human ambassador stood to make a toast. Admiral Xr'tikians leaned forward eagerly. Surely now, after consuming multiple glasses, the effects would show. "Distinguished guests," the ambassador began, his voice clear and steady, "we are honored to host this gathering. As is tradition, we've saved our finest wines for last." Though I must say, he added, with a knowing smile that sent chills down Xr'tikians' spine, we've noticed some interesting new notes in this year's vintages. Almost experimental, one might say. Several humans in the crowd chuckled, a few even winked at the increasingly uncomfortable Xr'tikian delegates. But before we bring out the final selections, the ambassador continued, we thought we might share some of our other traditional beverages. After all, wine is just our diplomatic drink. For real celebrations, he gestured, and servers began wheeling out new carts laden with bottles of various shapes and sizes. Admiral Xr'tikians' universal translator began processing the labels. Vodka, single malt scotch, Everclear, grandmother's secret moonshine recipe, now legal-ish. In the corner, technical analyst Mippop's disguise as a potted plant suddenly seemed very insufficient cover indeed. The Admiral's bioluminescence had faded to a sickly pale yellow as he watched humans eagerly approaching the new bottles. Xr'tikians, he whispered. What are the alcohol percentages in those containers? High Scientist Xr'tikians ran a quick scan, then ran it again, certain there must be an error. There wasn't. Sir, she replied, her voice carrying a mix of scientific fascination and horror, I believe we may have made a tactical error in our choice of beverage to contaminate. Across the room, a human was explaining to a fascinated group of aliens the concept of proof, and why multiplying it by 2 gives you the alcohol percentage. The number they quoted made several Arthurians briefly lose their crystalline structure in shock. The diplomatic gathering had transformed into what humans called an actual party after the introduction of their stronger spirits. Admiral Xr'tikians watched in mounting horror as humans began enthusiastically explaining their various alcoholic beverages to the gathered aliens, complete with impromptu chemistry lessons and historical anecdotes that sounded more like survival stories. You see, a human biochemist was explaining to a group of thoroughly shocked Arthurians, wine is really just the beginning. It's what we give to teenagers at family dinners to teach them responsibility. She held up a bottle of clear liquid. This is vodka. We invented it because sometimes you need to drink something that also doubles as spacecraft fuel. The Arthurians' crystalline bodies vibrated with concern. Across the room, another human was demonstrating the proper technique for drinking something called tequila, which apparently involved salt, lime, and a complete disregard for one's personal safety. The worm in the bottle is purely decorative, they assured their horrified audience. Usually, High Scientist Xr'tikians was frantically updating her research notes. Their liver function is fascinating, she muttered, scanning a particularly enthusiastic human who was explaining the concept of shots to a member of the quantum collective. It's as if they evolved specifically to metabolize increasingly potent forms of alcohol. Actually, interjected a passing human historian, that's exactly what happened. We've been distilling alcohol for so long that we basically turned our bodies into organic processing plants for ethanol. Want to try some moonshine? My grandmother makes it in her bathtub. In her what? Squeaked technical analyst Mippop, who had finally abandoned his plant disguise after a drunk human tried to water him. Chief Medical Officer Plixnor was having a mild breakdown in the corner. Their blood work makes no sense, he exclaimed to nobody in particular. They're drinking something that's 95% pure alcohol, and they're not only surviving but arguing about complex trade agreements and quantum physics. The situation reached new levels of alien anxiety when a human brought out something they called absinthe and began explaining its history. Several Xr'tikians had to adjust their containment suit's atmosphere mix just to handle the second-hand fumes. You banned this? Asked Chief Strategist Clopip, trying to understand human logic. Because it was too strong? No, the human corrected cheerfully. We banned it because people were having too much fun. But don't worry, it's legal again. Want to see why they call it the Green Fairy? Admiral Xr'tikians' bioluminescence had dimmed to almost nothing as he watched humans casually consuming liquids that his sensors insisted were better suited for degreasing engine parts. His carefully orchestrated plan to undermine human diplomacy had instead revealed a species that had turned recreational poison consumption into an art form. Did you know, a human chemist was saying to an increasingly pale Xr'tikian, that we originally developed higher-proof alcohols as a preservation method, but then we thought, hey, why not drink it? And now we have drinking contests to see who can handle the strongest stuff. Drinking contests? Xr'tikal's scientific curiosity warred with her survival instinct. Oh yeah, there's this thing called grain alcohol that's basically pure ethanol. We drink it mixed with energy drinks sometimes. You know, for fun. The Xr'tikian delegation huddled together, their bioluminescence synchronized in distress. Their compound, their carefully designed inhibition-removing toxin, was apparently weaker than what humans drank for casual enjoyment. Sir, Clopip addressed Admiral Xr'tikans, I believe we may need to rethink our strategy. The humans aren't just resistant to our compound, they're evolutionarily adapted to process alcohol so efficiently that they turned it into a cornerstone of their civilization, offered Xr'tikal, who had given up on maintaining scientific detachment and was now taking detailed notes on something called a Long Island iced tea, which, she was distressed to learn, contained neither tea nor any form of moderation. The final blow to Xr'tikian confidence came when the human ambassador approached their group with a tray of small glasses filled with clear liquid. Care to try some traditional human spirits? Don't worry, we've adjusted the proof to be safe for non-human consumption. We learned our lesson after the Centaurian diplomatic incident of 2157. Poor fellows never stood a chance against Polish vodka. Admiral Xr'tikans looked at the offered drink, then at his failed invasion plans, then back at the drink. He reached for the glass with a trembling tentacle, suddenly understanding why humans had survived every attempted invasion of their planet. They weren't just resistant to toxins, they actively sought them out and turned them into social activities. In the days following the annual Interstellar Cultural Exchange and Trade Summit, the galactic community buzzed with discussions about humanity's relationship with alcohol. The Xr'tikian attempt to poison Earth's wine supply had become the galaxy's favorite water cooler story, though explaining the concept of a water cooler to non-humans proved almost as challenging as understanding human drinking habits. High scientist Xr'tikal found herself leading an impromptu xenoanthropology conference in the Geneva Convention Center's largest auditorium. The attendees included scientists from 17 different species, all eager to understand how humans had evolved to treat industrial-grade solvents as recreational beverages. Let me get this straight, a Xr'tikian researcher interrupted, their containment suit vibrating with confusion. Humans discovered alcohol by accidentally eating rotten fruit. And then, Xr'tikal continued, her tentacles gesturing at the hollow projection of human history, instead of avoiding this toxic substance, they decided to optimize the rotation process. Fermentation, corrected a human biochemist who had joined the panel. And yes, we've been deliberately fermenting things for at least 12,000 years. Pretty much anything that contains sugar, actually. We've made alcohol from grain, potatoes, fruit, honey, milk, seaweed. She paused, considering. Actually, it might be easier to list what we haven't tried to ferment. The audience's various note-taking appendages scratched, clicked, and hummed frantically. Meanwhile, in the Xr'tikian embassy, Admiral Xr'tikans was facing a different kind of inquisition. The High Command had received the report about Operation Grape Expectations' spectacular failure, and their response had been unexpected. They want us to what? Xr'tikans' bioluminescence flickered in disbelief. Open trade negotiations, repeated Chief Strategist Clopip, who had somehow managed to maintain a straight face, quite a feat for a species with 12 facial segments. Apparently, several council members were quite impressed by human alcohol tolerance. They're particularly interested in something called cocktail recipes. The situation had evolved beyond anyone's predictions. The Arthurians had already commissioned a study on incorporating human spirits into their crystalline matrix regeneration protocols. The Quantum Collective was attempting to calculate the probability of humans surviving their own drinking habits. Their preliminary results kept returning, error, impossible. Even the Xr'tikians had requested samples of various spirits for atmospheric analysis. In the human delegation's offices, the ambassador was holding court, explaining centuries of drinking culture to a fascinated alien audience. You see, he elaborated, pointing to a historical timeline, nearly every major human civilization developed their own signature alcohol. The Russians have vodka, the Scots have whiskey, the Mexicans have tequila. It's actually been a major driver of technological advancement. We invented new types of glass to store it, new methods of chemistry to distill it, new transportation systems to distribute it. "And the poisoned wine?" asked a junior Xr'tikian diplomat, their bioluminescence tinting with embarrassment. The ambassador laughed. "Honestly, we noticed something was off with the taste about 2 weeks ago. Our scientists identified your compound pretty quickly, but everyone thought it was so amusing that we decided to play along. Though I must say, it paired surprisingly well with aged cheddar." In the scientific wing, human and alien researchers had begun a collaborative study on human alcohol metabolism. The preliminary findings had caused several alien scientists to require medical attention due to shock. "Their bodies don't just tolerate ethanol," explained a human doctor to her stunned colleagues. "They've actually evolved specific enzymes to process it more efficiently. We literally adapted to metabolize poison for fun." But why continue drinking it once you developed other beverages?" asked a baffled Arthurian researcher. "Oh, we have this thing called college where young humans traditionally learn to—" The rest of the explanation had to be postponed, pending several alien requests for emergency mental health services. The incident had even spawned a new field of diplomatic study. The Galactic Council's Department of Xenocultural Relations had hastily assembled a task force to understand what they termed the human alcohol paradox. Their first report, titled "From Poison to Party: Understanding Human Recreational Toxin Consumption," became an overnight bestseller across the galaxy. Admiral Xr'tikian's personal log entry from this period would later become famous. Note to self: when attempting to poison a species, first check if they're already drinking the poison for fun. Second note to self: never challenge a human to what they call a drinking contest. Third note to self: what happened to my other tentacles? The most remarkable outcome was the emergence of a new galactic tourist industry. Humans had begun offering guided tours of Earth's various alcohol-producing regions, complete with safety warnings for non-human metabolisms and emergency medical staff on standby. The Bordeaux vineyard that had hosted the luminescent peacock even erected a commemorative statue, though they got the number of tentacles wrong. High scientist Xr'tikian's final report on the incident concluded with what would become a famous warning in xenobiological circles. When studying humans, always remember, what other species consider a lethal toxin, they probably consider a condiment. Approach with caution and a designated driver. 6 months after the failed wine poisoning incident, the galactic community had undergone a dramatic shift in its understanding of humanity. The Xr'tikian attempt to undermine human diplomacy had instead launched Earth into an unprecedented age of interstellar commerce, primarily centered around what the Galactic Trade Commission officially termed recreational chemical exports. The Xr'tikian High Command had transformed their former invasion planning room into what humans would recognize as a high-end bar. Admiral Xr'tikian, now serving as the official ambassador of alcoholic relations, a position created specifically to save face, had become an unexpected expert in cocktail diplomacy. "And this," he explained to a group of visiting dignitaries, his bioluminescence now trained to pulse in sync with drink recommendations, "is what humans call a martini. They claim it's their most sophisticated beverage, though I'm still trying to understand why they insist on shaking some, but stirring others." Earth had established specialized trading posts across the galaxy, each carefully calibrated to provide safe drinking experiences for different alien physiologies. The Arthurians had developed special crystalline decanters that could safely contain human spirits without dissolving. The Xr'tikians had engineered new containment suits with what they called party modes, complete with specialized intake valves for alcohol vapor appreciation. The Quantum Collective, after extensive probability calculations, had determined that the safest way to approach human drinks was to exist in a superposition of both drunk and sober states simultaneously. Nobody quite understood how this worked, but it seemed to be effective. In a delightful twist of irony, the original compound that the Xr'tikians had used to contaminate Earth's wine supply had been repurposed. Human biochemists discovered it made an excellent hangover cure when mixed with something they called hair of the dog, though they refused to explain to their alien colleagues why dogs were involved in the process. The annual Interstellar Cultural Exchange and Trade Summit had been permanently relocated to Earth, rotating between major drink-producing regions each year. The event now included a traditional reenactment of the failed poisoning attempt, with Xr'tikian diplomats gamely playing their former roles while humans demonstrated their impressive alcohol tolerance. High scientist Xr'tikians had published a groundbreaking paper titled The Ethanol Equation: How Human Recreational Toxin Consumption Shaped Galactic Politics. It became required reading at diplomatic academies across the galaxy, though most species had to include a disclaimer that students should not attempt to replicate human drinking habits. Perhaps the most significant change was in galactic threat assessment protocols. The revelation that humans regularly consumed substances that could strip paint off spacecraft hulls had led to a complete overhaul of species classification systems. Humanity had been recategorized from potentially threatening to fundamentally incomprehensible, but generally friendly, unless you hide their bottle openers. The final report on Operation Grape Expectations, filed in the Xr'tikian archives, consisted of just 2 lines. Attempted to poison humanity's wine accidentally became their best customers. And so, in the great tapestry of galactic history, what had begun as an attempt to undermine human diplomacy had instead cemented their position as the galaxy's premier suppliers of carefully cultivated organic toxins for recreational consumption. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor almost as potent as humanity's drinks. As for Admiral Xr'tikians, he eventually became something of a celebrity in human drinking circles, known for his signature cocktail, the Failed Invasion, a luminescent blue mixture that carried the warning label, "Contents may cause spontaneous tentacle growth in non-Xr'tikian species. Drink responsibly, or at least creatively."